everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me. My name is Lesley Cohen. I am an Assemblywoman, which means the Assembly is the lower house of the Nevada legislature. And I represent the people of Assembly District 29. I know you're from all over the world, but for those of you from Nevada, it's the older part of Henderson and the older part of Green Valley and a tiny bit of Silverado Ranch. And in Nevada, our legislature is a part-time legislature. So it's made up of people who all keep our day jobs. So we have teachers, we actually have a rancher. We've had cowboys over the years. We currently have a rancher, and we have lawyers. There's always lawyers, and I'm one of the lawyers.
Absolutely. And if we could just jump right in, because I already got some student questions, because we don't want to take too much of your time. So one of the students emailed me and they want to know, working as an attorney and a legislator, what advice would you have as far as time management? Because I don't think people understand that you have to travel a really far way away and be away from your home for a long time if you live in the southern half of Nevada and you're a legislator.
Right. And I think that's a great question for any job, any field, and even for being a student. And I think we all have to find what works for us. And we're lucky. We live in a time where there's lots of technology that I didn't have growing up. So whether it's using some sort of online tool or through your whatever I don't even know what they're called anymore, whatever programs you've got out there for yourself, or just pencil and paper, but you have to find what works for you. And if you're having trouble finding what works for you, that's another great thing about technology. I think there's, you can just keep trying and looking online, and if you're allowed to go to YouTube and all the different sites and watch videos and see what different people are using. But I do, I like writing lists. I like being able to cross things off, but that doesn't work for everyone. And I think also making sure that you're using your calendar and making sure that you put ticklers in your calendar for yourself along the way. So if you have a report due and it's due at the end of the semester, you want to know, like, a month later, have I done XYZ? And then a month after that, have I done XYZ, so that you're not doing it all 2 days before it's due, because it's just added stress you don't need.
So you're saying don't put things off, like
don't put things off, but just find the best way for you to figure out how to create the method for you. Like you actually, hello, hi, it's my calendars. So what you can see behind me is, so I work at a law firm, and obviously we have an online program, but for me, I like to see things, to know that something is due, and actually see it and see that it's coming up. And then I also have to-do lists. So those are all eraser boards. So I have to-do lists for orders, which is when the court issues an order and the attorneys have to draft the order. I also have a to-do list for a certain form that in the type of law I do, we have to fill out, or clients have to fill out, and they hate doing it and it takes a long time. So I do a list, so I keep track of it, and then I do my calendar. And then another list on the other side, you can see, not the most high tech. And like I said, my office still does online calendaring, that type of thing, but that's just best for me to see it and know that, okay, 2 weeks from now, whatever is due.
And I wanted to touch on a little bit, because we've got some questions from the students in the chat. And again, guys, keep those questions coming. One of the students wanted to know, what drew you to the career of law?
I've wanted to be a lawyer since I was a little kid. Both of my parents were in law enforcement. So that was the type of thing we discussed, a lot of those issues around the law, around the dinner table. And it's just a really good way to help people, but it's also really interesting. And it's always going to be, there are lots of different fields within law. So if something isn't the right fit, you can always try another field. But it is hard work, and it's very stressful. And so you have to make sure that it is something you really want to do.
So as an officer of the court, you interpret the laws, but as a legislator, you help create the laws. So that's got to give you kind of an advantage in both fields, which is kind of neat to experience that. What kind of subjects do you recommend the kids study in high school if they're interested in following in your career path?
It's kind of interesting when you go to law school, you meet people from all over the country, and you also meet people who studied all sorts of things in college. There were a lot of us that did poli-sci, political science, and a lot of people that did history, that type of thing. But you'll also find people who had science majors and who even had I think my sister's a lawyer. She went to school with someone who had a degree in acting from college and then went to law school. So I think you can do anything you're interested in, and you should study as everything. But if you do find yourself particularly interested, I think being able to write is really important. Being able to speak in front of groups can be important depending on what kind of law you practice. And it's also good to, you can kind of start to learn the background and start to understand how, at least for those of us in the United States, right, I guess everywhere, how your country's government was formed and how the law plays into that.
That is really good advice for the kids. One of the kids wanted to know, who did you look up to, or which people, if it was more than one, did you look up to when you were growing up?
Oh, I didn't think of that. I think there's a woman named Nellie Bly who is lived in a time where women were, mostly worked in the home and didn't have careers. And she was an adventurer, but she was also a reporter. And she put herself, at the time, we didn't know how to treat people who had mental health issues well. And a lot of times they just kind of ended up in these horrible asylums where they were just kind of stuck there and given no treatment and no hope of getting out. And she pretended to be mentally ill and had herself put into the asylum so that she could report on what it was. And it really helped out the movement and made sure that people were treated, because most people didn't know how bad it was, and also didn't know that there were people in there that maybe weren't as sick as needed to be just shoved away somewhere, but really could have good lives if they just got a little bit of help. So she was one. I mentioned my parents, being able to talk to them around the dinner table and learn what they did to help our communities and keep our communities safe. I don't think I realized it at the time, but I think they were heroes as well.
That is really interesting. So we have a question from Raul, and Raul, what country or state are you in? You should be able to unmute to ask your question.
Yeah, hello. I'm in Spain. I live in Madrid. And my question was, have you made any major impact on the Nevada laws or in any laws?
Yes. So I've been in the legislature for 4 sessions, and I've been able to vote on some major legislation for Nevada that helped fund our schools, fund our government, fund our healthcare. From last session, probably my biggest, bill was a bill having to do with voting and making voting more accessible for people who have disabilities, and making sure that they're able to vote online. That was probably my biggest bill last session and the one I was most proud of. Other bills over the years that it's funny, I can never remember them when I'm asked about my bills. I should always think about my bills before I talk to people.
We're sorry to put you on the spot like that.
That's my fault. I should know what bills I brought. I brought a bill that helped people that were injured, on the job, and to make sure that they get training, so that even if they can't go back to their old job, they can still work in new fields or get proper financial compensation. I brought a bill having to do with, in Nevada, a lot of our land is owned by the federal government, but like a lot of our land. Most of our land is owned by the federal government, which is unique in the United States. But I brought a bill to protect an area of it that's called the National Wildlife Refuge. And so it is federal land, but the state was able to kind of give some input to Congress to let Congress know that we wanted to protect this area. And not only is this area unique for wildlife and flora and fauna that we want to protect, but also the original inhabitants of the area lived there. So there are petroglyphs, and you can be walking around there and you look down and you find arrowheads that people had used hundreds of years ago or more.
And that's interesting because we just took a virtual field trip to the Valley of Fire last week. So a lot of these kids are familiar with the 2,600-year-old petroglyphs that Dr. Josh Bondi, paleontologist, showed us. So sorry for Raul's coming with the hard-hitting questions.
Yeah.
So thank you, Raul. Awesome question. We have another question from a student in France, and they want to know, what advice do you have for high schoolers in regard to high-stakes tests as someone who has passed a bar exam?
Oh, yeah. That's another one where it's going to take different people handle it different ways. And you know, with the bar, there are a lot of people that don't pass on the first try. And I think for most of them, it's not that they don't know the material, it's that they kind of psych themselves out and get so wrapped up and so stressed out that they can't answer the question. It's I don't know if you've ever had that happen where you're trying to remember something and you can't remember it. And then hours later, it just floats into your head. You knew it all along. You just kind of were worked up. And so I think it's just finding the tricks and tools that work for you and understanding that you know the material. You just, you know, have to calm down and get to the place where you can produce it when you need to.
That is great advice, especially for these students who are looking to go on to college or have some sort of entrance exams on the horizon. So we'll just do like a couple more questions. So I wanted to ask, like, you've seen some of these events virtually. Can you give us your opinion as far as connecting students with expert speakers like yourself? Like, do you see value in this?
I do. We follow each other on social media, and I've seen some of the other speakers you've had, and it's just, I've noticed that and thought that it was a great idea. It's always good that people can communicate in different ways. And I think one of the few good things to come out of the global pandemic is that we're utilizing the technology more to do meetings, to do events. There's so not too far from where I live in Las Vegas is the FLM Chocolate Factory, which makes really, really good chocolate. And they started doing virtual tastings. And then in New York City, there is a museum that's called the Tenement Museum, which has to do with a lot of immigrants in the beginning of the 20th century lived in a certain part of New York, right? And they came through Ellis Island and ended up in these neighborhoods, and they lived in what were called tenements. And the Tenement Museum now does virtual tours. It's just, amazing that, some of the great museums in Europe are doing virtual tours now. We should take advantage of it. It certainly makes the world more accessible and for us.
Absolutely. Okay, before we let you go, the final question. So what advice would you have for these students as they go on out into the world and discover kind of what kind of adults they want to be as someone who's accomplished in her own profession?
Thank you. I think, you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. And that's the same for all of us. And so just work hard, but understand that, there are different ways to get things done, and you just have to find the right way for you and find what you want to do. But you'll eventually get there, and you'll have the career you want and the life you want, and just, be prepared to work for it and understand that, like I said, there are good days and bad days, and that's okay.